We are here to talk about why all these signs are popping up around town as citizens of Superior. I'm Bruce Thompson. I've been the president of Better City Superior now for 3 years. And I'm a fourth generation Superior resident. I'm very proud of that, and I'm very vested in this community, and I really want to see this community rise again. And so the first thing I'd like to have you think about is I've got a picture I'm going to put up on the screen here. That's the year I was born, 1960. That's downtown Superior. There were 13 furniture stores, 9 shoe stores, 11 bakeries, 6 movie theaters, 5 movie theaters, 6 banks, 2 full-service hospitals. I was born at the St. Joseph's Hospital in Billings Park. Obviously a lot of vibrancy, a population of 33,563. And interestingly enough, the millennial workforce, the young people of today, saddled much with student loan debt, are gravitating much towards downtown urban living, out of necessity in many cases, but in a lot of ways they're not like our generation that was all about accumulating things, having a suburban home with 3 cars and all of the toys. They're more about relationships, and they're more about experiences, and they like to congregate and spend time together, and they really value quality of life. And quality of life brings jobs, as I'll show you in a minute. The state's major initiative is all about workforce development for the state of Wisconsin. And there's a big concern, how are we going to draw the workforce up to northern tier communities like ours to support our existing businesses, let alone draw more employers to our community? And it all starts with the people. It doesn't start with bringing the business first, because really the employers need the quality workforce. And so we've got to find a way to entice young people to want to live in our climate, and with our natural resources and with our opportunities here. This is 50 years later. This is downtown Superior before the streetscape was done. And I counted 15 empty buildings and open storefronts as I walked this 4-block stretch. And as you can see, the population is 27,579. And one of the critical issues here is our lack of consumption and our lack of momentum. And so that is why so many of you raise this property tax issue as a problem, which it is. There are less of us paying the bills. That's 6,000 people we've lost in my lifetime who are paying taxes in this community. The other thing you need to think about is that 45% of the housing in Superior is now rental housing. So only 55% of the people have a stake in the ground and own a piece of property that ultimately will need to be resold. And so the average household income for that 45% population is $25,000 a year. Now you talk about consumption and how do we grow this economy without building it on the backs of visitors and new people into this community. The 45% that rents in this community, 35% of them spend 39% of their income on their rental payment. 20% of them spend 50% of that $25,000 on their housing, a rental place to stay. That doesn't leave a lot of consumption-based income to spend at our businesses and our restaurants. So how do we get those types of spending behaviors to come to Superior? You consider major retailers that have been lost recently are having a significant impact on our city and county government. If the 2 basic predominant sources of income for a city government are state shared revenue and property tax levy. Now, it only makes sense that the state is only going to share back with us a percentage of what we contribute to it. So if we are driving ourselves on low income levels and less sales tax paid, there's going to be less shared back with us. Well, there's only one other component really that is significant in that city budget revenue figure, and that is property taxes. So if we don't drive the revenue side from a consumption basis, the alternative is they're going to make it up on the property tax side of it. Our initiative is about growing the consumption-based value so that we can ultimately lower the property tax burden, bring more people to town, spread the burden amongst more of us, and create more growth for our communities and our families. So as we've evaluated all of this and come to the conclusion that this takes a lot of courage, it's long-term planning. It's not necessarily for my generation. It's to prepare a place for the future workforce. We were told early on that this, when we started to bring developers to town after we had done the market studies and we had done the project studies, and we've looked at what's working in other parts of the country, what's bringing young people, and what's growing that workforce that attracts employers in. And we said this can happen in Superior, and this is how we can fund it, how we can finance it, but there's a public-private partnership necessary in this. The public has to invest something in their community in order to make all of this work. And so we came to the conclusion that the city doesn't have any money to invest in growth. Their budget is very tight, and it's very tight for the reasons I told you. The shared revenue piece continues to decline because we're not putting enough in, and the property tax levy is hard to increase because we're already very heavily taxed relative to the valuations of our homes and our incomes. It's a very tough vice for city government to be in. So you have to figure that investing in growth can be a way out of it, but how do we do that without, over-risking ourselves and drawing from a pot of money that doesn't exist? Well, that was the challenge for us, is find the money without obligating us. Well, we were lucky enough to work with very extraordinary consultants, practitioners who've done this in other parts of the country, and they looked heavily at the opportunities within state government as it is, and found that there is something called exposition district legislation that has been around for 20 years but was specifically designed for Milwaukee. Now I was told, well, you can't do certain things in Superior, you can't do them in Wisconsin. Well, I found that you can, you just have to do them within a district like this. Well, it's never been done in a small market before. Well, okay, but it was designed at one time for a large market. Why don't we relook at it and see if it is applicable to a small market? The obvious evidence across the bridge is that they welcome 3.5 million visitors annually to Duluth Market. 70% of them come from the Twin Cities. They now are tracking to do $11 million in tourism taxes this year alone. And that is being reinvested in new events, new opportunities, reaching out, doing marketing to bring different types of people, different groups to town. So that's all really exciting, and it helps fill up our hotels over here on the overflow. But again, we haven't got the complementary assets over here to draw that tourism dollar over. So they're building it on the backs of people that don't live there. What a novel idea. But the people that are expending these, it's a consumption, it's a value-added tax because it taxes their hotel room. It taxes their dinner when they eat out. Usually you're getting a pretty good value when you do that. You've got an experience, you don't mind it, and it fuels the economy of the place that you visit. So what we're talking about here with our advisory referendum is asking the citizens of Superior to think about trying to get the law changed so that this would work for Superior, so that we could put in an additional 2.75% hotel motel tax and a 0.5% rental car tax. And the one thing that you would invest in your own community would be a nickel for every $10 that you spend out at a restaurant. That is your personal investment in the types of bonding that the district could create to make the assets in the first place. That's also the repayment for the debt on the assets, because when we create the assets and you have the tax revenues, then you're able to pay back your bonds because you welcome a lot of new visitors into town to help pay that burden. And you have a choice. You don't have to go out to eat. You can go to Duluth and pay 2.75% on your dining over there if you like. I know a lot of Superiorites do that all the time and don't blink an eye. Would you be willing to make that investment in your own community at only a nickel, 1/2 of 1%? So we really believe that we know that these things can be done. We've seen it done elsewhere. Mankato, Fargo, Cleveland. There's lots of communities. Ogden, Utah is our model city, actually. Ogden, Utah was a down-and-out railroad town that had terrible crime, terrible drugs. Downtown was a train wreck without the trains. And they, after 15 years, have had experienced $1.2 billion of reinvestment. They've raised their average household income 20%. They only have 19% of their city budget dependent on property taxes. We're over twice that. So the consumption-based model of spending and getting more people in your community to spend and taxing on that spending, which is choices, is the whole key to turning around this continued burden of living here, which will only get worse as less and less of us. 6,000 have left over the last 50 years. Well, if we lose another 1,000 over the next 10 years, that means there's 1,000 less to be paying the remaining tax burden. And the city isn't getting any smaller, the crime isn't getting any less, and we still have, needs for police, fire, public works, parks, you name it. It takes a certain amount of vigilance and determination to operate a city nowadays. There's much more regulations on cities being forced down from state government. So it's not easy to just pick out one thing and say, well, I don't like the way they do this thing. You have to kind of look at it from all perspectives, all angles, and say, maybe some of this they don't have any control over, and we have to deal with it. So the key is in growing the revenue side. The city has taken the first step by making an investment in our downtown. Our streetscape is pretty doggone nice right now. That took an $8 million investment out of the city, partnered up with the state. We're going to get a similar investment in Belknap. We're going to have great thoroughfares. We're going to look beautiful. But if there's no reason to stop, it's just going to have the traffic scoot through town a little quicker. And we have a significant investment here. If we don't do something strategic and purposeful with this investment, what a waste. The largest increase component of the city budget is because of debt service. We have a lot of debt, and we've got debt because of things like this. This is infrastructure. This is necessary. It all works together, but it can't be done in a vacuum without other things going on to grow the economy around it. There's still 15 empty storefronts up and down. There's still not, the excitement and the energy that you heard today in our downtown. And we want to fill those streets not only for our existing businesses, but for businesses who want to locate here, because we're creating a place that's vibrant. So again, this is an investment that's already been made on your behalf, and we're already paying for it, and we're servicing the debt on it. But in and of itself, it is not going to bring new businesses to town. It is not going to create the vibrancy because it's a street. I mean, the reinvestment in properties along that street, if there's no people on the street, nobody's spending money, it's not going to be any more of a success. So the fundamentals for growth are investment capital. Everything we're trying to do with the Exposition District legislation is to build that capital base. The last time Superior did a successful private-public partnership was Barker's Island 35 years ago. We went to the citizens and we asked for a $6 million bonding issue. And then we partnered up with a private developer to run that marina and make it a showpiece of a business with his private capital. And we did the background numbers on all of that over the last 35 years. Not only were the bonds paid back on time, but that's been a $10 million win for the city over that 35-year period. Net profit, $10 million. Annually, it throws off over $300,000 for the city, and that doesn't even include the housing that followed on the end. That is a significant tax base for the city. Your city government is very tight, and where would we be without that had we not done that 35 years ago? Now the problem is a lot of the profit from that really should be reinvested in the next big thing. Unfortunately, a lot of it is washed into the general budget, so we almost have to start over now. But we have to remember this lesson. Next time we do something successful and it pays off, keep reinvesting, never stop. We were actually ahead of Canal Park with Barker's Island had we kept going. We may have had the equivalent of a Chicago Navy Pier or whatever, which would have been more of a tourism destination than when finally Duluth woke up and said, geez, we got to take this terrible polluted industrial area and make a Disneyland for the Twin Cities folks to come. So if we get the investment capital from the district, which again is private bonding, because the legislation allows for the district to be its own municipality for the purposes of the bonding. From the three sources I mentioned, we could get anywhere between $8 to $12 million worth of capital that we could go out then to the market, recruit developers to town and say, what can we piece together with this? Our big plan, if it was fully implemented, was $100 million. Needed $30 million of public participation. So that's $30 million of private capital, and I'm only talking about 8 to 12 here. So if we were going to go that route, you'd still have to trust us to try and find another $20 million without layering on the backs of the property taxpayers. But I think if we can bring $8 to $12 million to town, and we can go out to developers and say, look, let's try and do something here with this. Tell us what you can do. How much capital can you bring to town with what we've got? And what kind of assets could we piece together that would be complementary to Duluth? Everything we've done is proof of concept. It could be done. It doesn't have to be done that way. It doesn't have to be those assets. But we know we don't want to duplicate Duluth. We want to complement Duluth because the whole region is what has to win here. And we have to start playing not only for Team Twin Ports, but Team Superior. We all got to have the same vision. Again, it's all about building that quality of life. When we create the quality of life, the jobs will follow. Because the employers will look for that steady workforce. It's getting harder and harder to find a reliable workforce. And believe it or not, these young people are very talented. They just need to be constantly challenged, which is hard for the old guard because, you know, we're challenged enough as we get older. But these young people are very, very sharp, and they need to be challenged. So they're very productive, but we've got to get them to want to live here. And then ultimately asset utilization, I get this question all the time from citizens of Superior. Well, what about the waterfront? What about the municipal forest? What about, you know, the other assets we have? They're absolutely right. We are so asset rich in this community, but so underutilized. It's a shame. We have the assets to make this such a quality of life area for the next generation, but we really need to have the resources to fully utilize it. Right now, the city struggles maintaining a municipal forest that's bigger than the city of Superior itself. And it's got so much opportunity to get people out in it and enjoy it. Yet we don't have the plan, we don't have the resources. We can talk about it all you want, but at the end of the day, it's a drain. It doesn't produce anything, but it could, and it could be kept in its natural state to do so. So in all of our research, we've found that successful communities have a clear vision. They set their expectations high. And because of that, you shoot for the moon and you land somewhere in the stars. You don't always get to the moon, but I think it was John F. Kennedy that said we were going to the moon long before we had any idea how to get to the moon. But we got there because that was going to be the challenge. Figure it out. And with young people today, we can figure a lot of things out. They're really, really smart. Again, the quality of life brings jobs, and you become a community of choice. We invest in ourselves. One of the big opportunities I see right now, and everybody talks about our poor housing stock in Superior, and it's true, it's one of the oldest in the country. It's hard to spend money reinvesting in it because there's not a return on it. But there are a lot of millennials being drawn to the Duluth market now because of Maurice's investment and the national recognition for bike trails and all this sort of thing. There's a good amount of young people coming to work in this area, and they've got all of the student loan debt. Pushing in lieu of 5 market projects, in the last couple of years over there, which is great living and they love it, except many of them can't afford it. So what we're finding is young professionals, maybe couples, maybe not, but if they can save $500 or $600 a month on rent and live in Superior, that's attractive to them. And we've been talking to the state about an income tax credit for young people with student loan debt who put a stake in the ground in Wisconsin and want to live here. Yeah, we should give them some incentives, give them some sort of an educational credit against their student loans if they live here, because we get the benefit in the long run. We get that job here, we get them spending their money here, we get them hopefully branding with our community so that they become long-term residents, raise their kids, put their kids in our schools, and all this sort of thing. The last 5 people we've hired at our company come from outside the area. They all live in Duluth and Hermantown. So how is the state of Wisconsin winning when the job is here, but they raise their family over there, they do their shopping over there, they send them to their schools over there, they pay property taxes over there? How does just the job alone fix it? It doesn't. You have to have the whole package. So we need to be attractive. So what we're finding is that if you are like a rehab addict on these HGTV programs, and you take a home and you really clean it up completely, gut it and redo it nicely, the millennials will want to live in that environment for a time until they can get their debts down. They don't want to live in a hole, however. They did that when they were in college. They got their degree, they've arrived, they've got good income. It's such a downer to have to go back and live in a dive, so they don't want to do that, but they do want to save the money. So there is an opportunity for us to take some of our older housing, if we can get these entrepreneurs to invest their capital and totally rehab them in neighborhoods that can be rehabbed, so that we can start building an alternative for them. And then if we can brand with them over time that they really start to like living in Wisconsin, living in Superior, maybe they'll be the ones that build a home. Or buy, like the old days when you got out of school, you got your first house, it was kind of a fixer-upper, you fixed it up, you got your feet under you, then you moved on to the next thing, and raised your family in a little bigger house, and then when you get older, you downsize, and so all of that has been delayed 15 years because of the cost of education. But there is opportunity there. There's a great opportunity to bring these young people over to Superior because the rents are getting high in Duluth, and we could be a nice landing spot for that. But again, we have to create the overall quality of life. And then the last slide is kind of where we're at in the process. We've been stuck on this for a while. Seemed like we went from the bottom there to the first dot where we did the feasibility studies and everything. That took us about 1.5 years. The last 1.5 years has been kind of stuck on this spot because at the end of the day, we had to find the resources without impacting the property taxpayers. So we found the exposition district legislation, and now it's our challenge to change it. And the only way we can change it is if the citizens of Superior back us so that we can go down to the state, and all of our local representatives are very much behind us, our leadership groups are behind us. But we need to have a strong voice of the people. It really still matters. And put a lot of pressure on the governor to give us this opportunity. Because he won't do it unless we really want it bad. So we really got to show him we want it bad. There's still no guarantee he'll do it. All of this could end up being a big no. But it's worth the fight because you can see what's happening otherwise. So at this point, I would open it up to any questions. You can flip to the last slide. It's just got our little tagline on there. So, anybody like to comment or question? Yes, sir.
Bruce, I've seen go on to these complexes and that. Do you have a specific area that you're looking at for that type of?
Well, really, we're talking, north of 12th, over to Saha, over to here. you know, this should be part of a downtown entertainment district. Certainly there's some businesses that would be asked to relocate. I've talked to some would say, yeah, I don't need to be here, I can be anywhere, I cooperate. Some people have said, yeah, we'd sell out at fair market value. Others maybe not. And if not, we'll have to work around them. But there's so much open space, and there's so much emptiness, and there's so much stuff that just doesn't fit anymore, that we can piece it together. And again, coming up with the right projects will kind of be determined with how much money we can come up with and what other developers can bring to town. But I will tell you, the developers we've talked to see a lot of opportunity. There aren't too many cities that have 3.5 million people annually right on their doorstep. We create an asset over here that's complementary, that they don't have over there, that maybe even the Twin Cities doesn't have. Those people are going to patronize us. And you just probably read about the new rail, high-speed rail coming up from Twin Cities, would land in Superior as well. Well, they're projecting 750,000 people would probably land in Superior, well, back and forth twice a day. But it could all fit very well together and make this kind of really hip place to be and popular with the young people, and start to regrow the economy. Anybody else? Yes.
How is this different from the tourism tax? Is that on top of it?
It is a tourism tax. That's what we call it. When you tax restaurant and hotel and rental cars, that's kind of all called tourism taxes, because even though local people who do dine out still pay it, it's pretty common that tourists eat out a lot, because obviously they're not home, so they're eating out. And so that's what this is built on, is tourism tax. The only thing you need to remember as a citizen, and when you dine in Superior, you would be paying a nickel more for every $10 when you dine out. But I know that when you go to Duluth, you pay not a nickel, you pay 27.5 cents more on top of an extra 2% sales tax when you dine in Duluth. Why is it so popular? They have the variety. They have the momentum, they have the tourists, you have the choices, you have the Red Lobsters, you have, the Little Angies and all the opportunities. And when you go there, you have an experience. And the little tax that you pay doesn't keep you from going there. So if it keeps you from going to a restaurant as a citizen of Superior, the nickel for $10, I can, it's a choice.
And would this only be in the downtown area to be assessed, or would it be all Superior?
Well, this is interesting, because originally when we ran our numbers, we did it on a countywide basis. And I did go to the Towns Association, I went to the county board, and I got approval really for this to go countywide with the food and beverage tax. And even the Tavern League supported that because they're dying. They need more people. And if we bring them to Superior, they'll find their way out in the county. But at the end of the day, the specific legislation, the way it's drafted, is only for within the boundaries of a district in a major market. But we want to change that. We say we're a small market. We need a little extra advantage. We should be citywide at least to give us a revenue to pay back these bonds, because it's just would make it, to me, too much of a gamble to have such a small district and rely on that revenue. I think we need to be broader about this. This is really going to float the whole boat of Superior anyways. So we are proposing that when they change the legislation, they allow us, because we're a small market, to apply the food and beverage tax citywide. That's why it's a citywide referendum. So, anybody else? Yes, sir.
Can you speak to the synergy of multiple projects versus, say, just a hotel?
Right. In the case of proper development, it's kind of go big or go home. You have to have projects that work off each other and work together. Now, we've talked about, because it doesn't exist, a major indoor water park in Superior. It doesn't have to be that. We think that could be very successful, because there isn't anything north of the Dells of this magnitude, and we know what our weather is like, and yet we're surrounded by water, and so again, that tourism trade would support it. But there are other things. Indoor skydiving. I did this when I was out in Ogden, Utah. It's a huge draw. It's the closest are in Chicago. They're booked up all the time. We actually have someone in our community who professionally was a skydiver with the owner of iFly, those things are draws, and they would get people to our downtown. So if you had a convention center, hotel, and an iFly, and a theater with movies, all in a nice tight district, you would definitely see things filling in, because there'd be people on the street, and it doesn't have to be that. We just need to be very complementary. We need to be very unique and strategic so that we are successful. So it doesn't have to be the way it's drawn up, but it needs to. They all need to work together. If you just did a hotel downtown, I can guarantee you it will fail. If you just did a convention center downtown without the hotel, it would fail. If you just did those two things without anything else downtown, I don't think it would go. You really have to piece it all together and go a little bit bigger to make it the district you want it to be. Yes, sir.
On the topic of housing, what is currently being planned for the community by your agency, and what can the builders do to help?
Well, the city and the county, have a new housing study. I think it validated a lot of what we knew. We know the housing, needs a lot of upgrade. But our experience with professional developers is that the housing is the last to fill in. The good thing, we have some income qualified housing going up right now, and we've had some in the last couple of years in the city. That will hopefully, draw some people out of homes maybe they've been in 50, 60, 70 years, or looking for a better place, a little more convenient, whatever. The worrisome part for me is then what happens to that home? Who buys that home that is vacated, that's maybe not been updated for 50 years, it's an up and down, it's on a 25-foot lot, it's not the style of living that young people are looking for, it doesn't have the return on investment. If that falls into unscrupulous landlords, that can be a problem, because that, again, is welcoming people to town that are not, contributing as much to the economy as a homeowner would. And so, while we need to provide better places for people of all income levels, I think we have to be very careful when we do redevelopment that we surely should be replacing what we have with more modern, not adding to what we have and leaving the rest to fill, because that's just going to create a higher density of what we don't want. It's not solving anybody's problem, but creating a bigger one for us. So, there's efforts going on, like I say, to create some good new income qualified properties. But what we need to do is really be cautious about what happens to the ones that fall off and get vacated from someone who had their home there for 50 years and cared, and now nobody wants it for home ownership, but it falls into the rental pool. And does it get then fully remodeled, or does it get left to, deteriorate? So, and there are very good landlords in town, and there are not so good landlords in town, and we don't have any rental standards. And unfortunately, the state of Wisconsin just ruled that rental licensing is illegal in Wisconsin. So we can't even go the licensing route. We've been talking about it for 20 years in Superior. Now we can't even do that. So we have to trust the people in those positions that they're going to be putting people, for the most part in their homes that have had criminal background checks, that have, good ability to repay and an ability to contribute to our community in some way, shape, or form. We need to ask of people that move to our community, ask them to help our community too, not just take from our community. So, anybody else?
Yeah, how would you address the Emery Hotel? A good portion of those people, that's their permanent housing, even though it's considered a hotel. Would they be also assessed that tax that you spoke of?
No, it's not for long-term stay. It doesn't apply to long-term stay. If that's their apartment, no. That's not a tourism-related cost. So if that's where they choose to stay, they wouldn't be imposed on a tax. I don't believe they pay the hotel motel tax that's in existence right now. You may be surprised, we have one in Superior. It was used to build Saha Arena, and it still exists. And right now, the proceeds of that help support many of our other agencies in Superior.
That's what I was trying to ask before. Would this be on top of that? Or
It would be on top of that, yes, but it wouldn't apply to that long-term stay component. Right? We'd be relatively equal with Duluth. We'd be well below on the food and beverage tax. We'd be a little higher on the hotel motel tax. No, we'd be about the same. They've got more on us on the sales tax because they're at 7.5. We're at 5.5. They'd be 2.75% on food and beverage. We'd be 0.5% on food and beverage. And the lodging tax would be about equal. So all total, if you could stack them all on top of one another, it's about 16% if you pack them all on together. So.
First, when you go to eat at, for example, the River and Rivers in Duluth, which I own, I charge customers 10.5%, and Superior revenue 5.5%. So we're just asking that it goes to 6.
Anybody else?
In the best case scenario, everything's flowing right, what would be a time frame for this to?
Glad you asked that. Because this was supposed to be about the why, okay, which we started out why, and then we talked about kind of the how, and now we're at the when. That's the way we advertise it anyways. Yeah, the when, if it all went really well, this is how it works. Say the governor signs it into law in July. That would be the best case scenario. That means it's available for Superior to use. That means that it then becomes, not my deal, it's up to the city council, because the only body that can put an exposition district into play is the city council, okay? They create the district. They're only going to do that when they've fully vetted their developers, the projects. They're going to have a lot more public input as to what is the best solution, what does the public really feel strongly about, how do we piece this thing together. We're about bringing the tool to the table, and then we'll hand it off, and we would hope that a year and a half after that, perhaps we're kind of ready to go. Then they would establish it. That's when the taxation would start. And probably 4 to 5 years from now, you'd see results. But frankly, if they don't use it for its intended purpose, it doesn't stay. It has to go away. So they have to specifically create exposition district assets. You have to bond for it. You have to make them happen. If they don't do that, if they just put it into play and start the tax roll, that has a sunset on it. It will quit. So it's not like this becomes a legacy cost if they don't do anything with it. And we have to trust our community leaders, elected leaders, that, I think with this kind of a tool, you would be able to have many competing developers where you could shake them down and decide which one you really feel best about. Take your time, do it right. Make sure you get the right partner, like we did with Jack Cully down at Sailboats Inc., and have a great public-private partnership that pays dividends for years to come. So, anybody else?
Someone asked me why you chose lacrosse as your example. You work lacrosse fields.
Oh, well, primarily soccer, but lacrosse is an emerging sport. It's certainly growing in youth, high schools and whatnot. It's becoming a bigger and bigger thing. But there is a lot of soccer activity in the Twin Cities and in Duluth, and the conditions for playing soccer in Superior leave a lot to be desired, and the weather is always a challenge. So not only would it help our own youth and their soccer exploits, but we would be able to bring tournament play up here, big time tournament play. And then again, the facility will properly managed and run by private who would inject their own marketing dollars into it, run it for profit on their own, would be bringing all kinds of emerging sports. You could probably even pull off girls softball tournaments in a facility of that nature. The possibilities are beyond what we've just contemplated on this, but we know that that particular asset does not exist in the Twin Ports right now. So it's a unique piece to look for. Yeah. Anybody else?
One question. There's a lot of angst in Superior about real estate taxes, and I cover Facebook a lot. A lot of people on Facebook are very fearful that this is going to fall back on them on the real estate taxes. Can you explain how this works?
Sure. So the exposition district, again, is its own designated municipality, so to speak. It goes to the private market. The bonds for the Wisconsin Central District down in Milwaukee are purchased by investors in a Wells Fargo product. The money that's at risk for that public portion of the investment is private dollars. They buy those bonds because we've been given authority to charge a tax, which gives them some predictability of repayment. So if it doesn't, say it doesn't work out and the bonds default, then the private bondholders are out. And because everything we're doing is built on tax increment, we've not sacrificed any of the tax revenues that come from the existing base. We've built it on tax increment. So what happens is, like it does in our business, when something doesn't work, and we have to be correct in our business and have been for over 80 years, we have to be right 99.5% of the time for us to be a high-performing bank. And we have done that for over 80 years. All banks are held to that standard by the federal regulators. And those that don't get criticized severely, pay penalties, go out of business, whatever. And it happens. So what happens then if say it doesn't work and the bonds default? The city now has, say, $60 million of assets built by private development dollars, because that would mean that the private developer would have folded too. And he would have brought private leveraged capital to town, probably with mortgages. So there would be banks and things involved that would have a play in all of this. And what always happens in these cases is that you have to go fishing for the next person to run it at 50 cents on the dollar. And if it didn't work at 100 cents on the dollar, more than likely the next guy with the next great idea is buying it a little better price, puts his capital in, cranks it up again, has much better chance of success. And it all depends, again, how it's structured at the beginning. You have to structure it for success. But at the end of the day, the city ends up with some assets to go to market with, to bring a new developer to town. And it's all based on tax increments, so the city hasn't sacrificed its ongoing revenue stream. Because right now, the entire valuation of the 10 or 12 acres that we looked at was about $9 million. So the city is earning tax revenue off about a $9 million base there. We're talking about stacking 80, 90 million, $100 million of additional investment on top of that. And maybe it ends up only having a tax assessed value of $63 million in addition to what it already had. But we're only going to use the difference within our project. We're going to leave the rest of the tax base alone. So, any other questions? Well, yeah, Melissa. Excuse me? Yeah, well, that's beyond the scope of what we're doing. You know, that if you're curious about that, we have city representatives within districts for reasons like that, and that's part of city government, and that was, that's not something we're involved with at all. So. Oh, yes, everybody, there are rack cards on your tables. Please take them with you. If you own a business or if you have reason to be able to disseminate more of them, we have a stack of them in the back. Feel free to take a yard sign if you feel compelled to help us out. The stands and the yard signs are in the back. And also I would ask that if you do take a yard sign, when we're successful in November, we're kind of going to have to come back again in April and ask again. So maybe park it in your garage and drag it out again in the spring. But anyways, I appreciate your time, and contact me anytime. I'm at National Bank of Commerce. I've been there for 33 years. I'm not going anywhere. And call me anytime and ask me questions. So.
First Thursday this month.
Oh, yes. Thank you, Al. We are going to have another one of these in the evening. It's going to be Thursday, October 20th at 6:30 at the library. So if you have friends, neighbors, whatever that would like to hear it firsthand, I'm not sure we'll have a band there. But I loved having that, because that's the vibrance we need right there, and that's the young people we need staying here. So put that on your calendar. Thanks.